This is the house at the Double D. We'll stop there on our way back.
Take the old lady to make this boat propane.
Climbing up away from the river.
Better let him out.
Just
Maybe it's moving home propane. Sam?
yeah.
Cabins. A lot of them. That's pretty hard. Especially the count of
You want to help?
That's all the new buildings.
I don't have to speak. What's up there?
That was here.
I keep going on it. Let's go up there and look at the map.
Okay.
Looks like there's a map.
Yeah, I gotta go up here.
Corey,
Come on.
don't go in there. Come on.
I've only been at the museum for about a year, and one of the neatest parts about my job is getting to research and read and learn things about ghost towns like Kerwin and Arlen that we have in our area, early Meeteetse. I really enjoy that. I will answer your questions to the best of my ability, and I'll probably defer several of those to the Dunroods, as they've been here a lot longer than I have. They know a lot more about Kerwin than I do. We've got a wonderful slate of speakers today. Richard Dunrood, his brother Jim, his sister Mary Dunrood Webster said she might say a few things if it worked out. We have Evelyn Schnitzel Murdy with us. Her grandfather was John Henry Schnitzel here at Kerwin. And we also have another couple with us. I don't know if they're going to speak today. Ross and Bonnie Jordan from Lead, South Dakota. And his grandfather worked at he ran the Antlers Ranch for a year, which is down on Wood River, where Kerwin was going. And so we've got some people with some real strong ties to Kerwin here today. So I think we're going to have a good time. This will be a fun trip. I'm glad each of you came. A couple of short things. Mary Jane usually talks about the bears and the fire and all that kind of thing. Mary Jane Luther couldn't be with us today. She's with the Forest Service, and she's been working dispatch at nights for the fires, and so she needed to get some sleep today, so she was unable to be with us. I need to caution you about a couple of things. The bear rules do apply here. We're on the Forest Service. You've probably seen the signs as you came up. After you have your lunch today, you'll need to put your lunch, your coolers and things back in your vehicles, roll up the windows, that kind of thing. Once bears receive a reward, you know, if they get in your cooler and have a little snack, then they like to do that to other people and they become a problem. So we need to kind of control that. Just follow the rules on that, real simple. The fires are another issue. We had a lot of calls as we go, are you having a tour, you know, is the forest on fire, is Kerwin on fire? And fortunately, no. But we do need to kind of watch, you know, each of you with your packet did get information on the fires, about the smoking, about no building campfires, those kind of things. Just, you know, just follow that. We won't have any problems. Kind of watch with the vehicles. I think we're pretty good with keeping them out of the tall grass or, you know, starting fires and things like that. But we'll just kind of watch today. I'm sure we won't have any problems. I would like to talk just a little bit about the very early history of Kerwin. Kerwin has a really interesting and unique history. I've got a few notes here just so I don't forget something. In your packet of information, you should have a map. There's this information that has kind of just a year by year, blow by blow of what kind of happened at Kerwin, real brief. There's also a map inside here that shows you what the mountains are. So as you see here, you can kind of figure out, okay, now this is, you know, where I am. And there's also a brief map of the buildings. So as you walk through Kerwin, you'll know what building used to be, you know, the assay office, which one was just a cabin, you know, that kind of thing. So that's helpful. So this is good information. It's in your packet. If you did not get a packet, you can register right over here. Please sign up and they'll give you a packet. We're also selling books today. Carl Dunrood wrote a book called Let's Go, 85 Years of Adventure. And those are for sale in hardcover and paperback. We also have some, I think there's 5 photographs of Kerwin, early Kerwin, and also Amelia Earhart when she was here. And those are, you can order those. They're not for sale here today, but you can order those if you'd like. They're framed and right over there at the registration table. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Any questions before we start? Great.
All right, Mike mentioned, Nicola, we have 2 water cans to spray on fires. If we happen to start a fire somehow, we'll try to be very quick about it, put it out before it gets going. But I think we're just starting.
Very good. Okay. Okay. Great. That's good. Thank you, Richard. We'll go through. We'll have the speakers talk here just briefly. We cross the river and go through the buildings. You're free to walk around, take photographs. You're free to walk up. I think Jim is going to lead a group. Is that right, Jim? Where's Jim? Are you going to lead the group to Amelia's cabin?
I don't know if we have time.
Okay.
See how many want to go.
Okay, well, we can kind of work on that after the speakers. Amelia Earhart's cabin site is about 1 mile above Kerwin, just right up this road. You cannot drive up there, but you can walk up the road and find that, and that's kind of interesting. A lot of people like to go up there, and like Jim said, if we have time, we'll go up there. Several of the speakers have to go back early today. There's another engagement, and so we'll just go through and finish as we finish. Some of the early history of Kerwin is that in 1870, there was the Kuykendall expedition up to this area. And this was all Indian treaty property at that time. White men were not allowed here. And Kuykendall led an expedition up through Wyoming, and they were looking for gold. And the army was tipped off, and they intercepted them and said, okay, you know, they broke up their camp. They even burned some of their equipment and said, you know, get out of here. This is Indian territory. You're not supposed to be here. And they didn't do it. The group, I believe, split up, and they came on up here. Some of them came up through South Pass, and they came up on where the Indians had raided a wagon train or a group of wagons, and there was arrows, there was, bullet holes and everything, there was blood all over the grass, and some of them they were kind of nervous then, I would have been very nervous. But they still kept coming. They came up to this area, and one of their men disappeared on Woodridge, and he was found later. It appeared that he had been killed by Indians, probably Crow, and eaten by wolves. And so that was kind of scary. They really weren't supposed to be here in the first place, and then with the Indians and everything, it was kind of touchy. But they were up here looking for gold. Later, 1881, John Henry Schnitzel prospected this area. And then in 1885, William Kerwin and Harry Adams prospected the area, and they found gold. And that started a big rush. People were coming up here, mining, building cabins. This town of Kerwin was real active in the late 1800s and early 1900s. There were over 200 people here. And that's, Metitzi's only, 365, so that's a pretty good sized little settlement. Especially considering you all came up over the road, you know what it's like, and in late 1800s, that was, I don't know if I'd have done that. But 200 people did live here. There was a bunkhouse that housed 75 men. As you can see several of the mines. The Tumala mine is up further. The Wolf mine is over here. There's several others. As you came up the river, you could probably look and see several of the cabins, or where the cabins had been, or were partially still there, kind of spread out up the valley. In 1894, the Shoshone Mining Company was formed with John Henry Schnitzel, Mr. Freer, Mr. Gates, and Ernest May. And I'll let Evelyn talk more about John Henry Schnitzel and the Mays and the Antler Ranch. The Antler Ranch she passed on the Wood River, and she came up the river. There on the left side, most of you probably know where the Antler Ranch is. The Antler Ranch was very significant in Kerwin because they supplied the beef to feed the people here at Kerwin. And the wolves were so bad there that they brought in hounds from Germany to kill the wolves that were killing their cattle. That was also kind of a shipping point. They would bring a lot of things into the Antler Ranch, and a lot of their supplies would come from the Antler Ranch. There's some other interesting little stories. If you want to stop into the Bank Museum sometime in Meeteetse, we have a wonderful display that tells about a lot of the different people at Kerwin. There was a man named Grasshopper Bill. He was from Kansas, and he came here to get away from the grasshoppers. He was quite a guy. He ran the mail from Meeteetse to Kerwin, and there's some interesting little things about him. There's also a gal named Bronco Nell, and she lived down the Grable River, and she was a freighter, a woman freighter. And I have read and heard stories about that they could hear her a mile down the river, coming up the river, cussing at her teams. And there's some other things about her. She served some time in the Wyoming Penitentiary for stealing horses, and she also was into a little bit of bootlegging, so she was quite a gal. Kerwin has some real interesting people. In Meeteetse, we're kind of fortunate. There's two ghost towns in this area. Kerwin is one of them, and Arland is the other. Arland was a really bloody town. Kerwin, fortunately, was not real bloody. There weren't a lot of murders or things like that here. There were people killed here, but it was an avalanche or mine explosions, different kinds of things. But it wasn't a real bloody town. According to the things that I've read, there was no cemetery here. There was a general store. There was a post office. That there was no cemetery. Apparently, there was no saloons or brothels that I'm aware of. And so people would go down to Meeteetse for those types of activities. But Kerwin actually appeared to be a pretty clean town for 200 people at that time. Different mining companies were formed. Like I said, the Shoshone Mining Company in '94, the Galena Ridge Mine Company in '99, and several of these same people invested money in the different mines, like the Schnitzel, like John Henry Schnitzel, like Ernest May. These people had the money to invest, and they were interested in the mining here. Gold and silver was mined at Kerwin, and so these were investors who had the money, and they did invest the money into different mining projects. By 1902, exploration was well established at Kerwin, and that's when there was over 200 people here. There were 38 buildings, including boarding houses, a hotel, sawmill, post office, stores, and houses. But again, no saloons, no cemetery, and no brothels. In 1903, this is interesting for those of you who are interested in agriculture. In 1903, um, 1903 was the first sheep permit issued in the National Forest to a man named Frank Blackburn. And there was, after Kerwin died, there was a lot of sheep ranchers would come up here, they'd run their bands of sheep, graze them here. There was a lot of that in the area, not so much cattle, but there were a lot of sheep around the area. Clarence Dollar had a little store here where he would sell supplies to the sheep herders and that kind of thing. In 1907, I want you to imagine this, in 1907, in the winter, in February, there was between 50 and 100 feet of snow in Kerwin. And that's a lot of snow. Oh my gosh. Feet. 150 feet of snow in Kerwin. And in February 1907, there was an avalanche. It swept down on the Tewksbury store and killed 2 people. The husband and wife were taking care of the store, and an Italian man who was staying with them upstairs. Now you have to understand that, like I said, the mine, or the gold and the silver that was mined at Kerwin was of very low quality. I mean, these people worked really hard and got very little reward, very little back in the way of being able to make a living. And then imagine all this snow here, 50 to 100 feet of snow. And then this avalanche swoops down and kills 3 people in their little town. People here were devastated. And like I said, there was no cemetery. They had to send word to Meeteetse of what had happened. And then they started clearing the road for both Kerwin and Meeteetse to get the road open. And as soon as the road was open, people left. They left anything that they could carry. They left the sheets on the bed, put dishes on the table. It's not out of there. So as you walk through the buildings, think about some of what these people must have gone through. I mean, it's devastating. There were a lot of things, like I said, left here at Kerwin. And later, I think there was a lot of looting at Kerwin. And you might wonder why there's not a bridge to get you across into town. Yes, it is public property and that kind of thing with the Forest Service. But there was so much looting at Kerwin that they took the bridge out because people were driving pickup trucks in and hauling away loads of things. So there is a footbridge for the tour for you to get across into the town. But it's pretty much just here for the tour for this purpose, for safety, so be careful as you cross the bridge. I'm going to go ahead and turn the tour, the speaking part, over to Jim Dundrude. Jim, Richard, and Mary grew up on the Double D, and their father owned the Double D, and he owned Kerwin. He wrote the book, Let's Go, 85 Years of Adventure over there, and it talks about this area and also some of the other very fun, very wild things that he did. I think you'll really enjoy that book if you haven't read it already. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jim, and he'll talk more about when they were here. He'll talk about Amelia Earhart. I'm sure some of you are wondering how she fits into Kerwin and the whole picture, and Jim will explain that to you.
Thank you, Ethel. Well, this is the 4th year I've come up here to tell about the time we lived here. And we lived in 1941, we lived just across the river in a little cabin. It's one of the smaller ones just below the main office building. And at that time things were pretty well intact in a lot of ways. As far as that part over there was the main office building is where there were 3 mining companies occupied that. Just this side of it, there's no pretty much broken down building that is the assay office. And I guess that is where they initially broke the ore down to kind of get an idea of what they had in the quality of the ore. And that was always an interesting place for us kids to go, and whenever we did company, we'd get a rock and break it up. Everything was pretty well there that we could put it, go through the process what we thought was, but they had a big kind of a crucible, I don't know what, I should know the name of it is, that big cast iron, or real good iron kind of pot, and on a spring-loaded kind of sponge type thing that would break break that rock up. And even us little kids, we could raise that up and drop it as time spring loaded. We could really do wonderful with the rock as far as get it into powder, and then they have another process there. You put the fine, the small rock on, then you can rub that. Get it into just about the consistency of concrete, and then from there on, you know what a lot of bins with all different types of chemicals in it, blast furnace, and it's really too bad that wasn't kept intact because, I've never seen any pictures of that, and it's really too bad because that story was telling a story. So you got to kind of use your imagination. More and more pictures keep showing up. We just made a trip to Lee, South Dakota, met Ivo and Evelyn Murdy, which is pictures that I'd never seen. She's allowing us to get copies of. The museum will have some, and so that'll be probably some pictures that I've never seen and not anywhere, and it's it should be add a little interest to. Already the museum's got some really good pictures. One of them that stands out to me is the building that the snow slide took out, and it was where that snow slide came from was down. This is called Brown Basin up here, and I think probably what happened with all that snowed for 9 days straight like this, and that wind blows that snow where it really built up there. It came down this. There wasn't very many trees in this draw here then, but it swept down, took that building out, and the road used to go up the other side of the river and we could go over and see the building from the other side. Now you cannot see it hardly at all, but it is there, and it's laying. This drainage changed sometime later and washed under that building, and now it's laying down in that washout. So if anybody wants to see the slide, that's something that I didn't realize what the situation was after I saw it. And the museum's got a good picture of that before really before the slide took it out. One of the main functions of the whole area up here was the power plant. They had the three-phase current that went to the top of Bald Mountain here, provided Kerwin with electricity, and also a Pelton wheel that created enough power to run the generator. And that if you go past Canyon Creek, you see a big wheel down under the bank there. That was the air compressor. And that created 100 horsepower for the drills that they used in the Galena Ridge mine, which is right up to the Canyon Creek there. There's the trail that goes up from that. It's not hard to see that if anybody wants to walk up there. Kind of steep walk, but there used to be. That was pretty well intact. They had the blacksmith shop up there where they sharpened drill bits, and there were drills, old drills. Well, like Echo said, they just pretty much walked off and left a lot of that, and that was pretty intact. There's up here on this is the Mantis, I think the way they pronounce it, mine up here, and I didn't remember when we were kids. We got in trouble with Dad one time for hanging some drill bits on it without packing it out, but so we were responsible for getting them out of here. But there is still, I think it's I don't know what it is, air compressor or a motor up. Big items up there. I don't know really sure what they are. But getting back to the way they powered that was they ran the river in a flume around on grade. There's a waterfall down there. There's above that waterfall, they took that plume out, went around those graves, went straight down the hill, and with it, they had 14-inch pipe. They hacked it down. I think it's, if I remember, it looked like about a 6-inch long, kind of fire hose away. But that had enough, that the felt wheel I'd read somewhere where it was 12 feet high. I remember it being more like about 5 feet high, and then later on I did the report where that was what it was too. But anyway, that, you can imagine how much power that created. There must have been some operations there as far as that going, keeping that water running, and I guess they did pretty much year round. And, but they had a lot of pressure down there, and they're still there. They drilled a well down later, and the bulldozer kind of closed everything off, and so it kind of broke up. That's kind of the story of that down there. Originally, I guess let's talk a little about how this all came about. In 1931, Dad acquired this from Evelyn's grandmother at that time. George Sisson died, and he acquired that for her. And at the time we moved into the Double Deer, I wasn't around then, but the buildings that were there were 3 buildings. One was a homestead cabin, which is now, as you can see, which is the old barn. The next cabin up was the homesteaders, which was homesteaded by James Gibson. I finally found records of. I'd always wondered how that came about that we had that, but it was because it sure wasn't mineral mining, but it was no homestead, and he applied for the patent on that in 1901 and got it in 1904, and then the fact that Henry Stinson put this all together, and that they buy the whole thing and patent it. The other building was an old cow barn that was down, that isn't there any longer, and an old log building below that we never did know what it was for sure. But since then, in the records that it's found, and that there was what they call a stone store, and I guess there's a fellow named Dad Stone that might have had a store down there, and that's the only logical thing that I can think of that would have been there for. There also was some, I don't know, speculation or a little fact that there was a bar down there. No evidence of any foundations. That's not uncommon because when you see pictures, they were there, and now we don't see any evidence at all. One of the things that to put in contrast or kind of perspective a little bit, the hardships that they went through, probably not really like the stone fever. First of all, realized they built all this road up here with the horses, and of course it's been much improved. Even when we lived up here in 1940, there was times you met on the road down there on the hillside, somebody would have to back up. Now it's kind of rare that you have to do that because it's been widened out with big cats. But back in the early days, this is one of the things that was a really problem. A lot of traffic, horse and wagon traffic, as you can imagine. And every other day, they had days they went, traffic went up, days they went back. And I suppose they pretty much abided by that because you need freight wagons. A lot of times they had six or eight horses, 3 or 4 teams, and pulling 2 wagons, and you sure didn't back those up if the road was narrow. So they had outriders that went ahead and making sure that this didn't happen. But I imagine they really respected that traffic or they just don't interfere with the flow of traffic. The way Amelia Earhart got involved here, Dad was on a Greenland expedition with George Putnam, and Brooke will tell that, everybody advised that. I'll tell a little about it. He was an expedition to Greenland, and in that trip they got to be pretty good friends. And anyway, of course, George Putnam ended up marrying Amelia Earhart. And through their acquaintance of that time, Dad got interested in the Nude Ranch. Well, actually, back up just a little bit farther than that. After that expedition, they had Putnam had another expedition all lined up to go to Baffin Lake, and Dad was all trying to go on that. But they had a lot of time putting it together, and they had he was getting tired of waiting, and about the time that anyway, when he was to the point of wondering when it was going to happen, Elmer Berquist called him. Elmer was the person that Dad got acquainted with up in the park. They packed together up there. Elmer had come down to work on the Pitchfork, and at that time the Pitchfork Nude Ranch became available, and so Elmer got in touch with Dad and told him that what the situation was, and that they could have probably run that. And so Dad jumped at the chance. They both came back, or they ran that Nude Ranch. Worked, I guess they built a cabin or two that first year, and anyway, they were pretty involved in the nude business, and somewhere there, Dad got a chance to buy this area up here, so he did that. Elmer built another ranch above Pallet, kind of up next to Pallet 2 on the Grable, between Pallet 1 and 2 up on, and we called it the Homestead Ranch. And I might mention that, Connie Berquist is here today, and she's one of the gals that I grew up with as far as we were really good friends as little kids. And that was this kind of put Dad had pretty much a clientele that would wanted to come out and to the Nude Ranch. And of course, George Putnam and Amelia were one of the ones, some of the people that came out and took a pack trip. And what we did initially was down to the Nude Ranch, where the base was. Of course, we'd drive up here and pack out from here, and then we'd go back. I say we, I wasn't there. For two or 3 weeks on fairly extended pack trips, and this Amelia Earhart first she had a cabin. Her cabin is down at Doubleday, was the one I'm pretty sure that was up on the riverbank. It's kind of on beyond the lodge to the left there. It's right on the riverbank. And what Dad told me about the fact that she really liked the sound of that water, that restful sound of the Georgia Creek. And on that trip up and back, she found a similar place up here. Where that cabin site is just up over a steep bank to that. And that was one of the reasons, according to Dad, she picked out that site. But that is kind of the story in a nutshell as to how she got here. Mom said that I've had questions about any stories that they could tell, and really not. Mom and Dad there was never anything really exciting that went on. Pretty much just routine pack trips, which to some extent there was usually a little slack in some ways. But anyway, Mom really thought Amelia was nice. She was really an unassuming person, and really a good person to be out there as well. Any questions? I talked long enough here, I think. I can answer any questions.
I heard 2 versions. Is that cabin finished or not?
No, it's just 4 logs high. Actually, if anybody, I don't I probably won't be going up there, but I can tell you the story. I've already told you part of it. But it's just to the end of the road, and
On the other side of that
you're
drape?
going to see some cabins. There's 2 cabins there. One is the little one with Clarence Dollars that he moved. I don't know how many times he moved it. He's planning to move it a 3rd time when Kerwin got going down on this foundation that sits right up here. He was going to meet Mayor Kerwin. But anyway, he initially when we first lived here, he was over, lived across the river. He packed out of here. He came in here in 1910, and he's been in this country for a long, long time, and was here at the time that the store was running, when Tewksbury had the store, and he tells the story. He was really entertaining fella as far as for this talk. But he then when the forest allowed him to move on up there, they allowed him to build roads, and that's where the pack camp was. Well, that happened to be at the same place that Neil Earhart's cabin the site was, and so, but he was real careful not to interfere with it. The cabin is still there. It's like there's 4 logs on part of the wall that used to be just once it starts deteriorating, it deteriorates pretty fast. But all those logs are off now, pretty fast now. But anybody that wants to walk up, you can see. It's about a mile, and it's really pretty country up there. So I'll take a picture of it. That's kind of the story. That's all I can tell you. Any more questions?
Here. Has the river always gone under down here?
Yeah, it always, you mean down there at Double D?
Yeah, has it always just?
Yeah, it always has. That slide, well, it always has, since that slide, lady asked me the other day, when did that slide happen? And she told me, how long ago did that slide happen?
Many, many thousands of years ago.
Yeah, so, anyway, as you can see, those are really big rocks that came down, and evidently that's porous enough that that river just runs under and starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller. This year I happened to be up here at the time that when we went up, it was just stopped right at the road. When it came back, there was no side of water. It just happened to be at that time where water gets, it only can take so much capacity to go under, and when that capacity is reached, then it runs deeper. Yeah, it always has. It comes out down under the hill there, in a different valley, on the other side of the slide. Follow the slide down. Any more?
Jim, Carl sent me up here when I was 12 years old with the horses before the Dukes got here. And there was an old cabin across there, and Baird made me a sandwich. I had most for the horse. And I went in this old cabin, and there was blood all over the ceiling. That's how Sheepbird killed himself. It scared the hell out of me, and I ate my sandwich with the horse.
Yeah, I wanted, this fellow used to carry me around when he was just by himself. Now he lives in, I mentioned this story. I think usually there's somebody here, or last time, Ellen Rice, who was here at the time there was a sawmill. The main activities was not mining as far as I was concerned here, even though there's about 20 people involved in mining when we were here. There was also, well, they weren't all involved, but of those about 6 people were involved in the sawmill. Clark Jensen, who lived on the South Fork, came to Ruby's Mill over. He had a sawmill site right down to Double D, pretty horrible site, right close to just on the bottom of down below the buildings there. Later he moved to another site up the valley about a mile and a half. And then the last site he had was down just this side of Clark Creek, there on kind of a flat spot. And saw lumber there for I don't know really how long, but it was the other I'd heard one time that there's 26 bands of sheep that were in this area. Well, I didn't, sounded like a lot to me, so I checked with the Forest Service and found that there was 22 permits. Started on Carter Mountain and went around all the way to, probably had a Middle Fork. And that was what justified the keeping the store open. C.L. Tewksbury had the store open here, and I always wondered how he could keep the store open just for the sheep people in here. That indicated there must be a lot of sheep people in here. Well, I read later that he was doing some mining on the Tumulum up here. He owned the Tumulum mine, which if you go by there, if you walk up there, excuse me, you go right by the Tumulum mine, and that is the one he had, and so that it wasn't, he had a kind of diversified business, but they are restoring that now, or they call it stabilizing, keep the signage from falling down more, and I don't know if they still are, but they've had it screwed up here trying to do that. I think that's, any other questions? Okay, Echo? Black?
Thank you, Jim. Richard has some things to share with us about the geology of the mining. Just checking to see our camera. I was trying to find some information about the people who ran sheep here at that time, and some of you may know my father-in-law, Tough Renner. He's been a rancher and an outfitter around the PC for several years. And he had, I think he was one of 11 children, and one of his older brothers was telling me a story how they used to run sheep up here. And Tough was too young to remember, but Hoover Renner lives in Moreland, and he remembered this from when they were here. His father was George Renner. They brought some of the first sheep into the Bighorn Basin. And there was a big snowstorm up here, and they had their sheep, and they didn't know how they were going to get them out. So they found this kind of embankment, a cliff, and they pushed the sheep to the cliff. They wanted to roll down, hit the tree, it'd be like a big snowball, and he'd hit the tree, and Hoover said the snow would just pop off of them, and they'd get up and walk off. That's how they got their sheep out of here. And that was one of the few stories he could remember, but I thought that was a pretty good one. So I'll turn it over to Richard.
Thank you, Echo. When we were putting together Dad's book, Tony and I, my wife Tony, who is right over there, we thought it would be good to put some sidebar information that would kind of give us give a little flavor for different aspects of the book, like in the Arctic expedition they had Captain Bob Bartlett, who was a famous seagoing captain. He was very famous for traveling in the Arctic, and I was amazed to find that he walked 700 miles after having his ship crushed in the Arctic Sea. Walked 700 miles across parts of Wrangel Island to the Point Barrow, and just anyway, we thought, well, this would be good to put things like this in. So we decided, well, we'll go ahead and put something in about Curwen, just a little sidebar information, and we were trying to decide what to call that, what to title it, because there was so many different aspects of Curwen. And we finally came up with the title, Curwen, Much Pain, Little Gain. And that really is, it really kind of sums it up, because there was a lot of pain, a lot of work went into this for not much of any gain. People put a lot of money and a lot of work, sweat and blood. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about that, and this comes, I'm reading a summary from one of the chief geologists at AMAX, and then I'm just gonna fill this in a little bit. Maybe before we do that though, why don't we talk about the mountains. That one over there is Mount Sniffles. It's a very distinctive mountain. I've always had a fond memory and feeling for Mount Sniffles. And as we go around, I suppose you're going to have to crank your heads around. And that's Spar Mountain. And in between Spar Mountain and Mount Sniffles is Cascade Creek. And then if you can look through that tree, some people will be like me, will be looking through the tree. That's Bald Mountain, this way from Spar Mountain. Then as we go around, we go to Mineral Mountain, which is the one that you can see the red staining on, the brown staining. And then just beyond that is the start of Dundee Mountain, which goes clear down to the Double D Ranch on that side. And then over here is Brown Mountain. And Jim already mentioned Brown Basin and Brown Creek here. And then Mount Crosby is the mountain right back here. And then in between Mineral Mountain and Spar Mountain, kind of the pass there starts what's called Spar Creek that runs down to the east side of Bald Mountain. So that gives us a little flavor for the country here. Shoshone Mountain Mining Company. And it was 1903 to 1907, the town of Kerwin and a hydroelectric plant down at Canyon Creek, Jim talked about some, was built to provide miners with a place to live and also power to the mine. And as the mining progressed, there were two companies emerged. That's the Galena Ridge Mining Company and the Shoshone Mountain Mining Company. The Galena Ridge Mining Company was down by the Pelton Wheel that you saw down there by Canyon Creek. And they drove, kind of hard to keep this wind, they drove a 2,300 foot long tunnel across cut veins on the Galena Ridge. And some of those were very rich on the surface, but when they cross-cut them at depth, they were not near as good. And this is pretty typical of this country. It's kind of like some of the Silverton country in Colorado. They're high up on the mountain. You have good mineralization. And as you progress downward, if you were to drill downward, you get less and less values. And this was a problem because you can go up here on the high ridges and get pretty good values of gold and silver and places and copper. But how are you going to get it down? You're going to unless you pack it on a mule or on your back. So a lot of the operation was to try to cross-cut this mineralization at depth and see if they could mine it that way, pull it out that way, and get better production at a lesser cost. So we have the Galena Ridge Mining Company that did that, and then we have the Shoshone Mountain Mining Company mined the Bryan and Pickwick mines. The Pickwick mine is up on Cascade Creek, just kind of at timber. If you look at timberline there, just beyond that, and then to the left on Spar Mountain is the Bryan mine. The Bryan mine did produce some pretty good values of silver, and they did ship, I've heard it said, they shipped a carload of ore out, but can you imagine how hard it would be to get that out? Because it's way up there on the mountain. So once again, they're pretty well stymied because they you know, if you start mulling, you start doing the numbers, and you say, how am I going to get this out at a profit? It's really hard to do. The Tumalum up here was one exception to that high mineralization, good mineralization high, low-grade mineralization. Up at the Tumalum, they did find some pretty good mineralization, but they were flooded out there by Wood River. Very, very hard to mine there, so that was difficult. the upshot of it was, here's the statement that to me kind of is the bottom line on that. Neither company found ore extensive enough or rich enough to be profitable considering this remote locality. Major exploration stopped after the major slow snowslide that killed the 3 people that Echo mentioned in 1907, February of 1907. And so only minor exploration was done after that, from 1908 to 1920s. And we have a USGS geologist. I worked for the USGS before I retired. This fellow at the USGS came up and did a report. His basic conclusion was the same thing. There's pretty good mineralization in places up high, but to get it, it's going to cut your profits out. You're not going to have any profits left. You're going to be on the negative side. And then we've already heard Jim talk about the operation on the ranch pretty much. When you go down past when it opens up down there about 6 miles, if you go back, you'll be able to see the Double D and some of the buildings that Jim talked about down there. In addition to Dad's work as a dude rancher and kind of a jack of all trades, I used to say, well, he didn't do much of any mining, and he really didn't. But one winter, he decided that he was going to try to open up to what they call a smuggler mine over the top of Spar Mountain. And so in the winter, he and another fellow, and I don't remember the fellow's name, walked up from the Double D, walked up Spar Creek over the top, and then worked on that mine and lived in a little cabin over there on Smuggler Creek. And they'd stay the week and then come back on the weekend. That's pretty rough duty. Very rough duty. In 1942 to 47, a fellow by the name of Charlie Wolf leased this Sherwin from us, and he built the Wolf shaft over there, as you can see, with the green building, the green roof on it, and the shaft to the right. And I remember Charlie Wolf saying, when we were living here in 1941, I remember Charlie Wolf said, well, he said, we don't have to go anywhere, we're sitting on it. And what he meant was, we're sitting on the good stuff. So he drove this shaft, so he leased this from 1942 to 1947 in hopes of finding marketable copper and molybdenum. Well, he couldn't find anybody interested enough to go ahead and market this, and so he gave it up in 1947. 1948 to 1951, Anaconda Lead and Silver did some work here, and they actually I helped open up the Illinois mine just to the right of the Wolf shaft away there, about 100 yards to the right. And we went in about 150 feet, opened that up, and there was quite a bit of molybdenum and some copper mineralization, an awful lot of iron staining. And then in 1955 to 57, well, back up to 51 to 53, a fellow by the name of Bill Wilson, who later became Assistant State Geologist for Wyoming, mapped this country as part of a requirement for a PhD thesis out of the University of Utah. And at this time then, Bear Creek Mining was kind of put onto this site by Bill, saying this is a pretty good, in the state of Wyoming, this is probably one of the major molybdenum deposits. And so Bear Creek Mining was interested in that. And then Bear Creek Mining said, well, we conclude that there's not commercial copper and molybdenum mineralization. And so then later in 1962, 63 to 1991, let's go 62 to 1991, American Metals Climax, which we called AMAC, was then, Bill Wilson told them, well, there's pretty good molybdenum mineralization. And they were a molybdenum and copper company. So they came in and drilled 150 holes, 87, well, let's round it off, 88,000 feet of drill holes. 88,000 feet. And on the basis of the drilling, they blocked out 196 million tons of ore on Bald Mountain here that ran point. Oh boy, here we go. Here we go. There. Yeah. 196 million tons of ore with a cutoff grade of 0.5% molybdenum and 0.02%, 0.5% copper, 0.02% molybdenum. And so they had a viable, this was a viable operation because it was because of the tonnage and because of the value of the mineral there. But then they begin to get environmental concerns about what if you can start open pitting that mountain over there. That's not going to set too well with a lot of people. And then the cost of copper dwindled. And so finally, after, let's see, about 22 years working on this, off and on, they gave it up and sold it to the Conservation Fund. And then the Conservation Fund transferred title to the U.S. Forest Service. And that was in 1992, and that's kind of the history of that. Just a couple of other notes, because I think Jim covered this pretty well. Clarence Dollar, as he already has mentioned, was kind of a real great friend to me and to us as we grew up, and his wife Norma give us Kool-Aid when we were little kids, but I remember times when he would tell me things that never really made sense until I realized this 1907 snowslide. He said, you know, up there in that cabin up towards Amelia Earhart's cabin, he said, when I came to this country, he said, I went in that cabin and there was blankets on the beds, there was dishes in the cupboards, and he said it looked like they just got up through their bedding, just jumped out of bed and left. And he said, I can't figure that out. Why would they do that? And now we know, because when that snowslide came and had all that snow, there was just a little window for them all to get out. You either left then or you stayed the winter. And they were all afraid of the snowslides. So that gave me a pretty good understanding now why that was the case. Clarence Dollar also was a great mimicker. You know, he could mimic anybody. And I remember his Tewksbury store used to sit right about over here. And I remember he'd go into the Tewksbury store to get things. And Tewksbury would say, well, he said, we're just out of it. But he said, the hopper, that was Grasshopper Bill, he said, the hopper's going to be bringing it any time. And he'd go shade his eyes, try to look for the hopper, and he'd see if the hopper was coming. Well, he knew when the hopper was coming, you know, but that's the way, we're fresh out, you know, that sort of thing. You know, behind every man that does these things like Dad did, there's a wife that's really the glue that holds this all together. In fact, in the book, Let's Go, 85 Years of Adventure, you'll see that Dad mentions, well, my dad was a good provider, but Mother was the one that really was the glue that held everything together. And I think that's the case with my mother. She was the glue that held this all together. And I think that's about all I have. If you have any questions about anything, then I'll try to answer anything about the geology or the country or the mining.
What is the elevation here where we are?
9,200 feet, about, roughly.
Who has the authority to name the mountains?
That's a good question. I think it varies because we have there's a Dunder's Peak up there and a Dollar Peak up beyond the Amelia Earhart's cabin, and now those were named by Bill Wilson of the Wyoming Geological Survey. Some of these other peaks were named, I would guess, they were named by early miners, maybe even Henry Snitzel named some of them, and then by tradition they were entered in on a map, and then they became, by tradition and however else, just with time, they became known as the mines or as mountains that they are. But it varied because most of them were old names, but then Bill Wilson did name two peaks up the head of the Wood River, probably in about 1955, mid-50s. Any other questions? Yes.
Were they going to haul it as far as smeltering or they were going to haul it out of here, or they were going to smelt it in place if they really found it?
Well, you see, that's one of the big problems because you can't haul it. You can't haul the ore out. You've got to smelt it, but then to have with AMAX, for example, they would have had to do major concentrating, and not only to excavate and make an open pit out of this pretty mountain, but they also would have to have settling ponds, and these were real environmental concerns. Now, the Bryan mine I was telling you about, they did haul a carload of ore out and take it to Helena to smelt it, but it was more of a what you might call a massive sampling operation than it was production. So that would be one of the major problems you'd have. Well, I've got to set up a smelter here, but that's costly, and it's environmentally a problem. And to haul it out, you can see the problem. You just came up the road. That's why Kerwin is like it is today, because there are some values of minerals that if you were able to get them out at a reasonable cost, you might have some production.
So there were no smelters here?
No smelters. Well, if that's it, I do thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Mary Henry Webster has some things that she would like to share with you, and then Evelyn Schnitzel-Murdy also has some things to share about her grandfather, John Henry Schnitzel, and then we'll wrap it up.
Where did it come from?
Thanks, Echo. I hope you're all having a mountaintop experience, or you will before the day's over. We used to bring our cattle up here. In 1945, we bought a ranch down on the lower Grable River, and cattle ranch, and we still own German. So we bring our cattle up here. Later on, we weren't able to do that because the elevation was too high, and we got lung disease. But anyway, I'll tell you a little bit about a couple of experiences I had up here with my dad. One year, he and I brought the cattle and left our truck down at Canyon Creek and rode the rest of the way. And Daddy, being an adventuresome person that he was, decided we had a bronc up here, and he decided he'd break that bronc. I was about 12, and the truck was down at Canyon Creek, and he said, snug that horse up to your saddle horn and run like hell. And that's what we did. And here I was thinking, what am I going to do if something happens? You know, how am I going to get out of here? We took our cattle up to what we call Galena Basin up above Canyon Creek, which is really a rocky trail, and we got up there and it was, it was really hard pushing those cows up that steep, rocky slope. So when we got up there, he says, let's go out over the top. So we went out on a mountain sheep trail, but it was such a blessing because we got up there and it was just like I could have reached my hand up, touched God. I just felt like I was at the very highest mountain. You keep going and you always see something a little higher, but it was really a blessed experience. And I just want to thank our loving God that brought us through all the times up here. Some of them were wonderful, some of them were kind of hard. It was a financial strain taking on this after the crash of 29, and but this is in our soul, this beautiful country. So thanks.
Very nice. Evelyn Schnitzel-Verdi lives in Lead, South Dakota, and like I mentioned before, her grandfather, John Henry Schnitzel, was here at Kerwin. He was very involved in the mining, and he's an investor here. And Evelyn has some notes here that she'd like to share with you about him and some of the things that happened here at Kerwin during that time.
I want you to know that I'm not a Bill Clinton or a Ronald Reagan speaker. So bear with me, I'll only talk for an hour. John Henry Schnitzel, he Americanized his name when he entered the U.S. Was born in Grimmershausen, Bavaria, Germany on September 20th, 1860. His father was in the German army, and Grandpa was left as an orphan at the age of 4. His grandmother and his uncle raised him. They saw that he had an excellent education. From 5 to 10 years of age, he attended military school, then on to Latin school, and later attended college. He specialized in chemistry as applied to manufacturing and received a degree as a pharmacist at the age of 20. He then worked as a druggist for 1 year at the Merck Chemical Company at Darmstadt, Germany. He did not like the political situation in Germany and left for the U.S. He entered the employment of an uncle in Monmouth, Illinois, who owned and conducted a packing plant, and he was given charge of the plant and the office. It was there that he gained a thorough business education. At the same time, he kept informed of the advances of the chemical field. He came to Denver and worked in the carbon camp at Ball Mountain near Lee. That was not this Ball Mountain, it was Ball Mountain near Lee. And he was employed as a chemist and assayer in Denver and the Delaware smelter. During his time, he developed some mining properties of his own and in Wyoming and Montana. John Henry was one of the original signers of the document forming the Wood River Mining District. He was the chief promoter of this project for 40 years. Additional promoters of Kerwin mining were C.L. Tewksbury, C.S. Dundee, and others. Even so, the project was slow to develop. One of the main problems was that the mining operation was far away from any shipping point, making marketing more difficult and thus making capital hard to come by. Pack mules shipped the first ore. In the course of the project, the mining companies came into being: the Wyoming Mining Company, the Shoshone Mining Company, and the Galena Ridge Mining Company. The Wyoming Mining Company was formed by Tewksbury along with other New York investors. In 1881, John Henry prospected the Kerwin country and obtained a patent for the whole valley. He invested $65,000 of his own money, which I'd like to have, in the Galena Ridge and sold stock to several other Chicago millionaires. The Shoshone Mining Company was formed by John Henry and other lead people, including John Blatchford, Ernest May, R.H. Driscoll, and T.J. Greer. These lead South Dakota men got together with two other men by the name of Gates and Hoyt, who established the Galena Ridge Mining Company. It was hoped that the Kerwin Mining Company would be a rival to the mines in Butte, Montana, Lead, South Dakota, and Leadville, Colorado. Again, the lack of railroad facilities was the biggest problem that the mine encountered. In the summer of 1905, the Galena Tunnel had been dug into the mine about 600 feet. Early assay reports showed that the ledge contained a great deal of galena, or lead sulfide, and copper with a little silver at the top of their croppings. And I think your brother, no, you mentioned that
Higher up in the pit.
yeah. And the galena turned less and less, and the copper turned into copper and iron sulfide. But they were now finding more gold. As the deeper they went, they found a little more gold. The telephone line was installed, and they had men working around the clock. Access to the mine was improved. In 1906, they hit a very rich gold lead in the Galena Ridge. Then the Shoshone Mining Company received new machinery for putting in an electric mine. The Galena Ridge operation had a large electric generator that was run by the water carried in the plume by the Wood River. They also acquired an air compressor. Two large steam boilers were also housed there for emergency power. All of this heavy equipment was hauled in by wagons, piece by piece, and assembled at the site after it arrived. However, in the fall of 1906, the work was slowing down and the Galena Ridge was shut down due to the lack of supplies and power. Once again, the mine was just too far from the railroad. In 1907, the snowfall was very heavy and a slide swept down the valley, taking in its path the home and store of Tewksbury. 3 people were suffocated and 1 man actually escaped when he was thrown through the window. By the spring of 1907, most of the men and their families had left. 4 factors seemed to be the cause of the closing. The ore in large amounts was not found, the long, hard winters, the distance to the market and access to the railroad, and then people wanting to ranch in the area. In October of 1931, Carl Dunroot purchased the holdings in Kerwin from Grandma Schnitzel after Grandpa's death. Carl built the Double B Ranch. During Grandpa's life, he was involved in mining, including being general manager to the Golden Reward Mining Company and the Hidden Fortune. His interest in mining never ceased, as he was always involved in different mines around the U.S. Some of them that included was the Gilch Edge, the Golden Crest Mine in the Black Hills, then in Nevada City, California, and Montana. He was also involved in the ranching business with Ernest May, but sold his interest in the Antlers Ranch in 1912. Ross will talk a little more. Our grandmothers were sisters, and they convinced Ross's grandparents to come up here and work for 1 year. Ross will mention that more. This information I was able to get out of some writings by other people, from newspapers and from Grandpa's letters. I'm sure that a lot of you people know more about this than I do, and maybe can change things or add to it if it does not seem right. My family would like to give, and we gave them to the Dunroots last night, a box of ore samples that have been in our possession for all these years, and it seems only right and fitting that they be returned to this area. We've also provided you some pictures that may be interesting. Thank you all for your hospitality, especially to Jim and Joan Dunroot for taking the time to come down and visit and convince me that this is the thing I should do. Also, I would like to thank Louise Thomas, who a few years ago came down and spent almost a week with us going over these things. Also to Echo, who called and invited us to this reunion. That one's
Oh, that's the best kind.
I don't think I need that. I do.
Well, they explained how we were related, which is kind of distant, but we're still related. That's how come we're still friends, you know. We're distant. But my granddad was in the ranching business, and Schnitzel was in the mining business. Schnitzel didn't know anything about ranching, and my dad didn't know anything about, or my granddad didn't know anything about mining. So he came out to run the ranch for 1 year. And he got things kind of straightened out. They wanted him to stay for more than 1 year, but he said, I got a place back in South Dakota that I gotta take care of. So that was as long as he wanted to stay. But he got things straightened out, and he had a lot of help, I guess, from the cowboys, from neighboring ranches and so forth. And they had a little problem getting the right brand on the cattle at Antler Ranch, but he got that straightened out. So things looked a lot better when he left than when he came. So that was his main purpose, to come out here and get things straightened out. My dad was, I suppose he was, what did we figure the other night, probably 12, 13 when he was out. He went to a little old school down there by the Antler Ranch, and he told me a few experiences that he run across, and he said, I guess some of these boys never went to school, you know, full time, and it took them until they were about 18 to get out of grade school. And so he said them boys was pretty big, and he was kind of controlling the school, and they had women teachers most of the time, young girls and so forth. Well, this particular year when Dad was out there, they had a man teacher. And he said this one kid was going to give him a little trouble. And he said all at once, he said he just smacked that kid and knocked him flatter than hell. And he said he was the best damn student he had all year. But a little discipline like that nowadays might not hurt, you know. But I wasn't expected to say anything, and those are just a couple of things. And I guess the schoolhouse was another little. I said that he had I don't know how many students they had, but I guess there was a little old hole in the floor, and once in a while a pack rat would come up in there, and they'd slip an overshoe over that hole, so he couldn't get away, and then they'd turn the students loose, and they'd kind of get rid of the rat that way. So the school conditions were a little different those days than they are now. But I guess he enjoyed the experience when he was out here. His family all went through the Yellowstone, left from here, horse and buggy, covered wagon, and went through the Yellowstone, and that's something he never did forget. So I guess it was a pretty good experience for him, and he always talked a lot about this. I guess that's about all I got to say. I didn't know I was going to say anything.
I forgot to say something. My daughter's here from California, and I want her to stand up. My cousin's here from Portland, Oregon. I want her to stand up. Connie, stand up. Who else? Who else? Anyway. All right. Thanks. A lot of fun. I really enjoyed this here, and I hope that you have too. As you wander around through Kerwin, you may notice the new roofing, like on the Wolf Mine right over there behind you. The Wyoming State Historic Preservation Office has come up the last 2 years for 1 week. And they've done a stabilization project. Jim or you just mentioned that. They had some special funding to do stabilization projects, and they believe that if you put a good roof on a building, that it'll give it several more years of life and that kind of thing. And so you'll see new roofs on several of the buildings, and that's where that's from. It's from the State Historic Preservation Office, their project. They had several volunteers. I know the first year Jim and Joan came up for a week. I don't know, were you guys up here last time this year? Okay. But they had several volunteers help do that, and if you're interested in things like that, they do different projects that you can help out on occasionally. We'll go ahead and turn you loose. You can have lunch, you can wander through the buildings. I did mention earlier that about the 2 ghost towns in the Meeteetse area, Kerwin and Arlen. The museum does sponsor a tour to Arlen in the fall. It is tentatively scheduled for October 21st on a Saturday. If you're interested in that. Arlen is a little bit different than Kerwin because there's no buildings left. It's just the town site. But we do have speakers and things for that. So if you're interested in in history, which you apparently are, and in old ghost towns like Kerwin, you might want to keep that on your calendar. I'd like to thank each of you for coming today. It's been a lot of fun. I listened to some of the same speakers last year and some different ones this year, and you hear some of the same things, of course, because it's the history, the years, and the facts, but you also get the neat stories like the pack rat, you know, and kind of fun little things that make it seem more real. So thank you all for coming and enjoy the, oh, one other thing, Double D Dude Ranch. On your way back down, you're free to stop at the Double D. The caretaker, Jim McGregor, is there. He's usually there 2-3 days a week. And he's usually there to give us a tour. And I understand that he has been hurt in a horse accident. He won't be there. The lodge will be locked up. You're still free to stop and look around. But we won't be able to get inside the buildings this year. But, you know, you're free to come back up to the Double D or to Kerwin whenever you can get in between the water and the snow. Thanks again for coming.
We're up here at Kerwin. Look at the design on here. And this one I think is a storage shed. Pretty good sized shed. Company office building. The last building we looked at, the little one over there, it was the assessor's office. This one's a log cabin. I guess this is a shed. Fallen down shed now.
Yes, I have.
Here's another little log cabin. Corey and the walking stick somebody gave to him. Just his size, of course.